Go ahead and look at our lesson. We'll see if Dallin joins us. And there's Dallin just as I pull up the lesson. Perfect timing. All right, let's look at our grade screen. Access management. It's the last lesson. I gotta open up something else for next week. Access management. The last lesson I have showing right here. The last one we have access to at the moment. So let's go to look at that lesson and see what we're talking about this week. Access control systems. Each network user and host device must be identified and categorized in certain ways for an administrator to control access to an organization's applications, data, files, and services. So this is done using an access control system. That makes sense. Which is the set of technical controls governing how subjects may interact with resources. And they define subjects as users, devices, software processes, or anything else that can request and be granted access to a resource. So in cybersecurity, the basis of access control is usually an access control list, an ACL. Here's another acronym for us, the IAAA. Access control systems are usually described in terms of four main processes: identification, authentication, authorization, and accounting, the IAAA. This is the system used to describe the framework for controlling access to computer resources, controlling the usage, and implementing procedures. So these methods are considered the foundation for effective network management and security. So identification protects by identification associates a particular user with an action performed on a network or system. In some cases, this is where the billing and delivery addresses must match to prevent the use of fraudulent payment methods. All right, authentication authentication validates a user's identity by asking for specific information like a unique username or password, that's most common, or security questions. You know, sometimes if you forget your password, you got to answer these security questions that you set ahead of time. Identification and authentication are the first vital steps in access control and must be met before the user goes any further. If you don't have a username and password, that's as far as you get on the site. Authorization allows users to perform certain actions like accessing, editing, saving files. Authentication allows users into a system where they can access files and make changes. So the authorization process determines where the user has the right to go within the network. What all are you allowed to look at once you log in? Users might include administrators, power users, standard users. So the administrators or admins, they run the show. They can generally access everything and they are able to set everyone else's access. They decide who could access resources on the network. Power users are typically employees who have a lot of access to features and information. The standard users are usually just business partners or vendors whose access is very limited. It's just limited to files and information, specifically dealing with the business they do with the company, whatever's shared with them. Where the power users can look at several different vendors and business partners' information. Accounting measures the overall access of users by tracking the amount of information they access, the resources they consume, and the number of hours they spend on a session. So everyone's actions are visible on a network. This holds users accountable for their actions. If something goes wrong or sensitive data is leaked, management and administration can track the issue to specific users and timeframes. All right, first of all, when this breach happened at 2:07 in the afternoon, who all was online? Who had access? Who was actually logged in at that time? So that narrows it down right from the start to say, okay, well, here's the only people that were even on the system at 2:07 p.m. So the accounting is a very important part of the whole cybersecurity process there. Basic authorization policies. There's two important functions in authorization: the process of ensuring that only authorized rights are exercised, and the process of determining rights. So the more privileges that an administrator gives to user, the higher the chances that it's going to be misused. So authorization policies help reduce risk by limiting the allocation of privileges as much as possible. You have to see this page, you need to see this page, you're going to need to see this page, but that page over there you really don't need to see. So we're going to cut that out. Implicit deny. I like the word implicit. We don't use that enough. Access controls like firewalls are typically founded on the principle of implicit deny. Let's see how they define that. Implicit deny. Unless there's any rule specifying that access should be granted, any request for access is denied. That means just as a standard rule, you want to access this page? No. Everything's set to no at the beginning. Implicitly, just no. And then we will grant access one by one for the things we figure out. Oh, you do need to see this page, so let's grant this one. You do need to see this. But any new page that's added, it's automatically implicitly set to don't let anyone look at this. So you have to go in and purposely let someone look at a page when it's created. So this means unless there's a rule specifying access should be granted, any request for access is just automatically denied. A firewall filters access using a set of rules. These rules are processed from top to bottom in order. If a request does not fit any of the rules, then it's handled by the last rule, which is to say no. The last rule is always refuse the request. So check this, check this, check this, check. Nope, you didn't qualify for anything. The answer is no. Least privilege. That's a good one. The idea behind least privilege is that a user should be granted rights necessary to perform the job, but nothing else. You don't need to know that to do your job. You don't need to access that page to do your job. You only need this page. Single sign-on. All right, so single sign-on, or SSO, means that users only need to authenticate to a system once to gain access to all the resources that your account's been granted rights to. You don't have to log in every time you change to a different page, right? Once gets you in, and then you can access all the different sites and pages and resources that you have access to. The advantage of a single sign-on is that users don't have to manage multiple user accounts or passwords. Because a lot of times you have to sign in different pages. There may be different passwords associated with that. So the disadvantage is that compromising the account will compromise multiple services. Somebody gets into the account, they've got access to all these different things because they only have to log in once. Important, the two terms, authentication and authorization, sound similar, but they are different in terms of cybersecurity. Authentication validates a user's identity to grant access to a system or network. Authorization is the process of giving the necessary privileges to the user. Authorization has nothing to do with validating the user's identity. It is what are they allowed to once they get in. Files, databases, sensitive information. In simple terms, authorization evaluates the user's ability to access the system to what extent. Authentication. Let's talk about authentication. Once an account is securely created, authentication verifies that only the account holder is able to use the account, and the system may only be used by account holders. So this is performed when the account holder supplies the correct credentials, defined as evidence attesting to one's right to credit or authority. If these credentials match the credentials that are stored in the system, then the account is authenticated. Several technologies are used for defining credentials, and they're classified using the following factors. Something you know. This is usually the logon, comprised of a username and password. That's the most common. The username's not usually a secret, but the password should be. All right, like you could tell any of these other students that you have in these classes what their email account is, because you know the pattern. You take the last name and the first initial. If somebody's already got the last name, first initial, then use the first two initials or the first three initials, because there could be repeat first names. Someone's named Smith. If you got Richard Smith, you know it's Smith R. Then when Robert Smith needs an account, you can't give him Smith R because Richard's already got that. So you give him Smith RO. to designate, so, but the passwords of everybody is different. So example, something you know, such as a password or personal identification number, is a something you know. Something you have. So this type of authentication can be more costly because every issue's got to be issued a token. Every user's got a token, and each terminal may need a reader device to process the token. So yeah, some companies use this where every time you log in, you have to pull up this device and it gives you a token that the computer's communicated with it, and then you type in that token, knows, okay, it's you because you had the device that told you the proper token. Something you have, such as a smart card or a token. Like to get into school, teachers, we have a smart card and we just hold that up to a little device and it reads it and it says, oh, you're allowed into the building. But, it's more costly because they have to produce these cards for everybody. And someone has to manage those and provide access. Like my card lets me in the 2 buildings. I can get into BHS or Bentonville West because I'm the bowling coach and I need access to that building from time to time. So they can set those cards up for 1 building, no buildings, 1 door, multiple doors, whatever. Something you are. So this means like a biometric recognition system. Like on my phone to access my bank account, it scans my face to allow me into my bank account on my phone. Many types of biometric information can be recorded. My wife does a fingerprint on her phone. So fingerprint patterns, retina recognition, eye scans. So something you are. So there's something you know, something you have, something you are, like a fingerprint, or something you do. Rather than scan a body part, a template's created by analyzing the behavior, like a signature. Maybe there's something you have to write, and only you write it that way. Everyone writes letters differently when they scribble them down. So creating a signature, they would see if that signature matches your signature, or did someone try to decide your name? Somewhere you are. This could be a geographic location. Someone logs in, but they're not in Arkansas. They're in Singapore. It would go, oh, you had the right username and password, but we know this person's not in Singapore. So we're going to deny access. So it could be measured using a device's location service and the GPS or even an IP address. So location-based authentication is not used as a primary, but can be used as an access control feature. Like if a user enters the correct credentials, like the right username and password, at a VPN gateway, but his IP address shows him to be in a different country than they thought he would be, the access controls might be applied to restrict the access. Sorry, you're locked out. All right, multi-factor authentication. This is becoming more and more important, and more sites are using it. A strong authentication product should combine the use of more than one type of something that you know, something you have, or something you are. This is called multi-factor authentication. Single factor can be easily compromised because the password can be written down and lost, smart key can be stolen, et cetera, et cetera. So implementation, strong authentication requires 2 or 3 types, 2-factor or multi-factor. So maybe you have to have the password and a fingerprint to be logged in. Let's see. Examples, something you know like a password and something you have like a smart card, or a password and a fingerprint, or a password and mobile device with location services to know you are somewhere that we could think, okay, that should be you. You're not in Singapore or North Korea. Knowledge check. Match the term with its definition. All right, there's all of our choices. Let's look at the first one. Users should be granted rights necessary to perform the job and no more. Let me open our chat so I can see this. Users should be granted rights necessary to perform their job and no more. Would that be SSO, identification, least privilege, authentication, accounting, or authorization? Well, if we're saying the user should be granted the rights necessary to perform and no more, that certainly sounds like least privilege, wouldn't you think? Allow you just the least necessary. There you go. It disappeared. All right. Users only need to authenticate to a system once to gain access to all the resources their account's been granted rights to. Is that SSO, identification, authentication, accounting, or authorization? Well, if you remember what SSO stands for, it's single sign-on. Only have to do it once, single sign-on. All right, measures the overall access of users by tracking the amount of information they access and the resources they consume and the number of hours they spend. All right, that would be the accounting, right? The accounting's keeping track of everything. The accounting. So let's say this associates a particular user with an action performed. Is that
That's identification, right?
identification? Let's see. An action. Let's see. Yes, you're absolutely correct. Validates a user's identity by asking for specific information like a username, password, or fingerprint. Oh, we talked about we talked about the difference between those. You're right. To authenticate the person is not the authorization. The authorization is to figure out what they're allowed to access. Right? They're authorized to look at this, 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 and this. Good job. Yeah, we talked about the difference between those two terms specifically. So, all right. So that's the end of our access management. Access management is a big part of every computer network. Let's see how many questions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. I like it. Which is the following example of something you are? I like it. Something you know. All right. I have never heard it termed that way. It's pretty cool. Something you know, something you are, something you do. That's kind of neat. All right. That's it for access management. I'll get something loaded up for next week because we're not done, but we're getting close because May is Wednesday. We're almost to May. So that means we're almost to the end. All right, guys. Have a great week. We'll see you. This is a B-Day Friday, but if you need help, I'll be here Wednesday.